So good morning and welcome to the Friday morning briefing. Back into them after the August break. Just in case there's anyone online that doesn't know me, I'm Judy Trotter, Head of Adult Education. And a special welcome this morning to our guest, Calev Ben Dor. Welcome back. It was May when Calev last joined us. And it's now been 349 days since October the 7th. And we've continued at JW3 to provide opportunities to raise awareness for the hostages, and so importantly for us to connect with each other and through these Friday briefings to Israel. And thank you for continuing to tell me that these mean a lot to you and you find them so valuable. So Calev, welcome back, and let's just
thank you, Judy.
Do this. So let's bring you in as well. So those of you who didn't hear Calev in May, he is the Senior Researcher Associate and the Deputy Editor of Fathom, which is a quarterly journal of BICOM, somewhere he worked for several years in previous times. He was also in the Policy Planning Division of Israel's Foreign Ministries. So he's a really good guy to have on. But thank you, Calev, again. We did send around 2 articles, which you'll also find on the website. If you put in Calev's name, then you'll see this morning, and it's got links to the 2 articles he's written, one in June and one this month, we're still in September, which are well worth reading. So if you haven't had a chance, do take that over the weekend. So, as always, this is not an easy task, Calev. So thank you so much. And a reminder, please, to put your questions in the chat as you think of them during the time. If there's time, I'll post them at the end. So what's uppermost on your mind today, Calev? With many, many thanks, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Judy. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be back. Always nice to do things with JW3. I thought, I was just thinking back to the past week, and I feel like the past week can be, for me, can be divided up into kind of Sunday, Monday, which I'll talk about in a moment, and Tuesday, Wednesday. So what happens on Sunday, Monday? On Sunday, Monday, there are increasing rumors in the government, in the public, that Netanyahu is going to fire the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, and bring in someone called Gideon Saar. Gideon Saar is a former MK of the Likud. He's very much of the right, but also very much of the anti-Netanyahu political world. Gallant, on the other hand, is very much seen by a lot of the Israeli public who are broadly very angry and frustrated at the people who were in charge on October the 7th, which is obviously both the army, who've admitted responsibility and will almost certainly resign, and the government, who have not admitted responsibility and shown no openness to resigning. Gallant is kind of seen really as the only adult in the room. I'm generalizing, there might be people who disagree, but he's kind of seen as the person who's not playing politics, but is actually trying to make germane military decisions. And so the idea that Gallant might be fired to bring someone else in, with the rumors swirling that this is primarily actually to resolve a political issue, which is that there needs to be some sort of Knesset law passed to organize, are Haredim going to go into the army or not? And that's the reason the Gallant's going to get fired, to bring Saar in to help to stabilize the coalition, to then pass this law. We've gone through a lot over the last 11 months, but that was actually pretty devastating, certainly for me. And I'm sure you're all aware of the 6 hostages who were brutally executed a couple of weeks ago. What was also in the news is that Netanyahu goes to the shiva of one of them, one of the male hostages called Ori Danino. Ori Danino, it turns out, comes from a kind of, I'd say, modern, borderline ultra-Orthodox Sephardi family, who should traditionally be very supporter of Netanyahu. And when he goes with his wife, the father, in a very respectful way, is actually extremely critical of the prime minister. In a way that if it was someone else, they'd call him, I don't know, a leftist. But this is obviously not a leftist. And he basically says, please, he says, my son was killed in a tunnel that you built. In other words, you allowed for millions of dollars in Qatari cash to go into Gaza for years in suitcases. But he also said, stop playing politics. Think about, you are the leader, basically, you're the leader of Am Yisrael, of the people of Israel. Start thinking in that sort of framework rather than what the polling says. And Netanyahu doesn't really answer him, and his wife, as is her wont, also manages to kind of turn it into them being the victims. But for that to happen, and then a week later for Gallant to almost be fired because Netanyahu needs to deal with a Haredi issue, we've had very dark days over the last 11 months. And you always hope that the leadership will in some way learn to think in a more statesmanly way. And so that news, those rumors were pretty devastating for me. I was very, very angry and upset by them. And then we get to Tuesday, Wednesday. And on Tuesday, Wednesday, we have this incredible intelligence operation where thousands of pages and walkie-talkies the next day, etc., basically explode in the hands or pockets of Hezbollah operatives in Lebanon. It is an incredible intelligence success. And then there's kind of this open question of, okay, so this is a tactical success. Is there a strategy behind it? And there's certain things I guess may or may not even come out. They certainly haven't come out yet, which is why now. As in, if this is or was the initial step in a kind of major strike on Hezbollah operatives, infrastructure, missiles. They've got around 130,000 missiles, 200 of which are kind of precision guided. You type in the GPS, unless that gets knocked out of the sky, it lands within 5 meters of where you've typed in. If it's the first step in that, then that's really incredible. If it's just taking out a few thousand Hezbollah operatives, undermining Hezbollah's confidence, forcing it to reevaluate how it communicates, dealing a big psychological blow. All of those are really important, but they're tactical. The strategic issue is, how do we return 60 to 80,000 people from the north who left their homes on October the 8th and are living in hotels or rentals in the center of the country? How do we return them home? Now, the answer to that is not easy, but I think the interesting question is, to what extent was this a strategic blow to Hezbollah or just a tactical one? Now the other option is, and again, without knowing any of this, I think is most likely, is that this actually was intended as an opening blow that would lead to then a much larger kind of strategic whatever. But Israel was left in the situation of kind of use it or lose it. Apparently, the Hezbollah were beginning to become suspicious. They maybe sent off a couple of these pages to Iran in order to look into, and therefore you get to a stage where either you use it now, even though it's not really the opportune time, or you can't use it again. And so my suspicion is that was what happened. In an ideal world, this would have been used as part of this kind of preemptive strike on Hezbollah. And instead, again, it was a very impressive intelligence success. It was very impressive tactically, but we are left with the question of, strategically, what do you change amongst Hezbollah's calculus is that can lead you to getting these people to go back home. So that was Sunday, Monday, and that was Tuesday, Wednesday. And I also want to spend just a little bit of time talking about Gaza and kind of the different ceasefire discussions. And there was a report in various Israeli media of a new Israeli suggestion for a ceasefire. So I just want to talk a little bit about that. The initial, all of the models of ceasefire until now was in stages. So there's an initial ceasefire, I think, for 42 days. Israel begins to withdraw some forces from Gaza. Hamas begins to return a certain number of hostages, known as kind of humanitarian ones. And then there's a second stage in which other hostages get, and also a large number of kind of Palestinian security prisoners get released. And then we get to the second stage. And the feeling was, certainly amongst Israelis, was that we're not going to get to the second stage. But it's worth doing because we can get out these humanitarian cases of hostages. By the way, at least 3, if not 4, of the hostages who were executed a couple of weeks ago in a tunnel in Rafah were on the names of the humanitarian hostages. 2 of them because they were female, 1 hurt because he was injured, and 1 had a Russian citizenship. So there was a question maybe he'd also be released. But the feeling was, we're not going to get to the second stage. And what actually, I don't think many people were talking about was this understanding that actually, if we don't get to the second stage, so you get some hostages out, but actually all of the soldiers and anyone under 50, you're actually keeping there. There wasn't really a plan for what you do with those people. I don't feel that was really talked about so much, as in the argument, well, we need to go now, we need to get these people out. But what was not really being discussed was it was actually only getting some of the people out. And depending on who you ask in Israel, there's different fingers to blame for that. I just want to just relate a couple of ideas. Obviously, people are free to disagree. I think the weakness of the bring them home now demonstrators was that it suggests that the power to bring them home is actually in the Israeli government's hands. And it's as if we can just click our fingers and then they'll be home. And what I think it ignores is the character of Sinwar, which I wrote about in one of the pieces, but I want to repeat here. A little bit about Sinwar. Sinwar was in jail for basically murdering suspected Palestinian collaborators, one of whom he buried alive. And when he was in jail in Israel, he also directed the murder of other Palestinians in Gaza who were suspected of inappropriate behavior. Some of you might know that Sinwar gets released as part of the Gilad Shalit deal, in which Israel get 1 Israeli soldier back for 1,027 prisoners. What fewer people might know is that Sinwar actually opposes the deal. Sinwar is one of the major, very influential Hamas prisoners. He's due to be released. He opposes the deal because not everyone in the prison is going to be released. It gets to the extent that the Israeli government, which by the way was headed by Netanyahu, and Hamas in Gaza, they both want the deal. Sinwar does not want the deal, and he's very influential within the jail. In the end, Israel put him into solitary confinement to allow them to sign the deal, and then he gets released. In other words, this is a brutal guy. He is also extremely uncompromising and ideological. And it doesn't help that he sees himself as a modern-day Saladin. Interestingly, he actually wrote a novel. Sinwar's a published author. He wrote a novel in jail where the hero, which is basically him under a different name, is very much wanting there to be a modern-day Saladin. So I think sometimes the debate on the hostage ceasefire thing ignores who Sinwar is and what he believes. And he doesn't really mind if 30 to 40,000 Palestinians get killed and if Gaza is in ruins. It's all part of his kind of, I don't know, sociopathic, pathological, messianic, ideological, whatever you want to call it, plan that will hopefully lead to a regional war. That's Sinwar. And I think sometimes that in that debate, we forget to emphasize that. And then we come to our side. And I think a lot of Israelis, obviously not everyone, a lot of Israelis, I would include myself in this without getting overly political, simply do not believe what Netanyahu says anymore. So when Netanyahu says, listen, the Philadelphia corridor, which is the border basically between Gaza and Egypt, is essential for our security. And therefore, I'm going to demand it in a ceasefire agreement, even if that's the cost of not having an agreement. What we think to ourselves is the security chiefs, who granted were also partially responsible for October the 7th. So you know, they're not, you know, it's not like Torah Sinai. It's not that, you know, they said and it's true. The security establishment believe that Israel doesn't need to maintain it. The defense minister thinks that the hostages need to be prioritized. And if the Philadelphia corridor was so crucial, why did it take 9 months to go into Rafah and to capture it? So unfortunately, we're now at the stage, and again, I'll just say again, it's partially political, the idea that you don't replace a government during a war made more sense to people in November and December. We've just experienced, you know, the greatest slaughter of Jews in one day since the Holocaust. We're all in trauma. We still are. Okay, we're all in trauma, and it's too much to suddenly switch. 11 to 12 months on, the fact that the same people are running the country has created a deep level of public distrust amongst the public. So even if on an analytical level, Netanyahu may be right, and he may be, that Philadelphia is super important, he has lost any of the public trust that he maybe managed to maintain it post-October the 7th. Simply very, very few people that believe that Netanyahu is speaking in a kind of inyani way, in a kind of principled way, and they believe that everything is now political. And I think that leads, it's also something that I wrote about for those who want to read, after those 6 hostages are executed, it comes just after a huge argument between Netanyahu and Gallant about Philadelphia, about the corridor, where Gallant is saying this is less important than the hostages' lives. Again, listen, the people who are to blame for the hostages being killed are Hamas. Hamas took them. Hamas did not release them. Hamas executed them. Okay? And Sinwar is a very, very problematic character. I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. But the feeling within Israel, not from everyone, but from many, is that the government has basically lost any public trust. And therefore, the arguments that the Prime Minister makes, people don't really believe it anymore. And that leads to hundreds of thousands of people coming out onto the street in a way that reminded me of the last time that Netanyahu fired Gallant, which was in March 2023, the night of the 26th of March. I remember because it was my wife's birthday. The night of the 26th of March. She's just nodding in the background. She's happy that I remember her birthday. And again, why does Netanyahu fire Gallant? Because Gallant criticized the judicial reform. And so he gets fired. And this feeling that things are being decided in a politicized way really drove people crazy. I went out primarily to report on it because, again, there's a certain uncomfortableness I have with the bring them home now, even though obviously I want them home and I want them home now. But I think what was really devastating there as well. Again, I live in Jerusalem. I live near the Prime Minister's residence. I live near the President's residence. A lot of the demonstrations are right outside, more or less, my house. I don't know how many of you have visited Israel in the last year or so. Hirsch's picture is everywhere. The hostages' pictures are everywhere. But in South Jerusalem, Hirsch's pictures are really everywhere. They're on the lamppost. They're on the restaurant that people go to. They're on the bus stop. And so I think for many, especially in the Anglo world, Hirsch wasn't just Hirsch. Hirsch was a symbol. He was a symbol of a hostage. He was a symbol of someone whose parents were these kind of incredibly caring and erudite and empathetic people at a time when a lot of Israelis have actually lost a lot of empathy for the other side. He symbolized in some ways, he lost an arm. He wasn't whole. He symbolized us. He symbolized the country. And I think we also felt, I certainly did, that story, it would have a happy ending. He would, in the end, come back. Many people have not come back and will not come back. But he would. And it wasn't just Hirsch's. It was Hirsch's a symbol. And so when he was brutally executed, it was, I think, a real blow for a lot of people. And I read about this as well. His incredible parents, his mother Rachel at the funeral, talked about them also believing that he would come back. They felt he'd come back. And she says, we now need to walk the path between, I just want to get this right, between from hope to grief. And then she said, we need people to help us on that path. And I felt that for the non-family members, the people that didn't know them personally, we actually have the other route now. We need to move. We need to walk along the path from grief to hope. And there are many days where I don't know what that path looks like. And what was actually very interesting is a lot of people said to me, "Oh, I read your piece. It was good. You were very hopeful. It's very optimistic." And I said, "That's very interesting because I actually didn't feel hopeful at all." And I'm sorry to end this on a downer. There are many days where I don't know how we move from grief to hope. I think civil society is full of kind of this incredible energy and thoughtfulness and heroism and willingness to sacrifice. But the politicians, not everyone, I don't like this whole thing of all politicians lie, all politicians are terrible, the plague on both their houses. I think that's too easy. And I also don't think it's true. But what Ori Damino's father said to Netanyahu is what we all need to do. To stop thinking about the politics, to stop thinking about the polls, and to think about the people of Israel and what we can do to move the country in a positive direction. And there, not every day, but there are too many days where I can't envision the path between grief and hope. So on that very, so sorry, now I just remembered a question. Okay. So the question was about the new idea of a hostage deal, which is basically skip out the stages. And I remember it now. There was a problem with the staged approach, because no one believed, including Hamas, that we were actually ever going to get to stage 2. So this new idea has a certain amount of logic. Just do everything at the same time, with the demand that Sinwar leaves Gaza. Now, if I was Sinwar, I'm not sure I'd leave Gaza. Now, by this, it's something that happens to Arafat in Beirut in the early 1980s. The idea of going into exile. I'm not sure Sinwar wants to. I think it's an interesting idea to cut out the stages. It has a certain amount of logic. And the other logic is Hezbollah will continue to fight, they've said, until there's a ceasefire in Gaza. So it also kind of makes us stuck. Okay. Without a ceasefire in Gaza, the hostages stay in the tunnels, and the violence in the north continues. The logic is, or was, get a ceasefire, that creates quiet in the north. Once you've created quiet in the north, Hezbollah said they're going to continue until there's a ceasefire. You create quiet in the north, and then you try with diplomacy to try to create some sort of agreement in the north. But it means everything is dependent on basically Sinwar's decision. So as a logic of getting rid of the stages, I think it does make sense. I'm not sure what Sinwar's interest is in agreeing to it, but there's a certain logic to it, and it also means that hopefully the north can also quieten down. So, Ken, those were just some thoughts from the last week, the last 2 weeks or so, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you so much, Calev. As last time, you're succinct. You make such good points, and certainly for me, you make us think about it in a different way, which is what we need. So
thank you, Judy.
It's been a really hard couple of weeks since those 6 hostages were. So, Kay's, it's more of a comment than a question, but she thinks that they didn't go into Rafah earlier because they thought the hostages were there and that it would be too dangerous for the IDF. And then they realized how huge the tunnels were, and that's where most of the weapons and supplies Hamas were coming from. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think another reason they didn't go into Rafah is because the Biden administration was pushing them not to. But what I want to try and separate is the logic discussion of Rafah yes, no, which is a very legitimate, reasonable discussion to have. And Netanyahu's argument that Rafah and Philadelphia are essential, where the people in the room are saying, we pushed for you to do this earlier and you didn't want to. So you can't now come when the hostages' lives are potentially on the line and now give us talking points about how important Philadelphia is when for months we begged you to go in. So again, there's a very, very legitimate, reasonable discussion to be had about a hostage exchange ceasefire. Absolutely. And by the way, there's a group of also hostage families and families of people whose children have been killed in the army, called the Gvura Families Forum, that say no. In their death, they commanded us victory. Nothing short of victory. That is a very legitimate position to have. So there is, on the one hand, this debate that I don't want to delegitimize either side on it about should we have gone Rafah, should we not? Philadelphia, yes, no. Hostage, ceasefire, surrender, yes, no. All of those are legitimate. But what the public think is, if you, the prime minister, didn't go in for so many months when other people were pushing you to, you can't now come and talk about how essential it is. We just don't believe you.
Okay, we're nearly at time. I've got so many points I wanted to discuss with you, but I always promise to finish on time, and you have
always happy to do a third time, Judy.
Just one question. Do you think anyone can put pressure on Sinwar? Will he listen to Qatar? Will he listen to Iran?
It's a good question. The argument would be that Qatar is the main leverage on Hamas in general. This is a slightly longer answer. I think there were different groups within Hamas, where Sinwar and Mohammed Deif, who is now believed to have been killed, were the really ideological armed resistance now group. And there was another group who were, we're controlling Gaza, and that's kind of good enough for now. I think Qatar did have leverage on some parts of Hamas. Do they have leverage on Sinwar? I'm not sure. Has all of Qatar's leverage already been used up? I'm not sure about that either. So listen, when you think you're the modern day Saladin, then, and what can Qatar say? We'll expel Hamas operatives from the hotels in Doha? Well, Sinwar doesn't care about that. So if you believe Israel is a passing phenomenon because it's colonialist, and the way to get rid of it is by armed struggle, and you dream about regional war involving Iran and Hezbollah, etc., and it doesn't matter to you that Gaza is in ruins, that's not such an easy person to negotiate with.
So on both sides, we've got Sinwar on one side, Netanyahu on the other.
Yeah. So Judy, I personally, I don't like the comparisons. Netanyahu has got his own challenges, etc. Netanyahu could also turn around and say, listen, if Hamas come out of this with the narrative that they won, then that will only lead to more violence and terror, etc. Sinwar believes that he's in a kind of messianic end of days battle with the Jews that he will end up winning. Netanyahu has other considerations, but it's for me it's part of a different discussion.
Fair enough. I'm worrying that you're going to have a tense weekend with Hezbollah talking about their retaliation, but it was really interesting to hear your take on what had happened, because it's been so crazy this week. I hadn't even picked up that it happened when it happened with the pagers and the walkie-talkies. So that was really a good placing of the scenario. So thank you for the whole morning.
Thank you.
Fabulous.
Thank you, Judy.
So much. Thank you everyone for coming and for your questions. And we'll reconvene next week with Daniel Taub, which will be end of my period. And I wish everyone the Shabbat Shalom, really one of peace, and find some inspiration. And wish you all well. And just a reminder that every one of these goes up onto our website and our YouTube page, so you can rewatch and watch ones you haven't watched before. So thank you so much. Take care everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Thank you.